Good afternoon. My name is Stephen Sykes and I'm your co-host for this afternoon's event. I'm director and co-founder of the 2030 Hub in Liverpool, the world's first United Nations recognised local hub promoting the Sustainable Development Goals. I'm also the Chamber Low Carbon Circular Economy Club coordinator. This afternoon event is co-hosted by Leanne Smith, who is the Accrington Circular Economy Club coordinator. So this is a joint event and has been brought together with IEMA and both Circular Economy Clubs and the Senator Group. So just a bit of housekeeping before we start. We're not expecting any fire alarms this afternoon. So if you do hear an alarm, and I've been told it sounds like a siren, please make your way to the exits, which are at the back there, at the side, or behind me. Toilets, for those who haven't found them already, and this is bizarre for all those online, toilets are actually just down that corridor. There will be a refreshment break midway through proceedings. Timings are a little bit loose because it all depends on how involved you get, what the timings are. As you've picked out already, it's a hybrid event. This is the first time we've done one. So we've actually got people online from actually all around the world. This is the joy of you advertise Lancashire, you put it on the internet, and the world responds, which I think is brilliant. We've actually had people asking for our downloads of our events, YouTube, and copies of the slides from Australia, India, a couple from China, and quite a lot from Europe. So have a website, go global. So hybrid event, it is being recorded and it will be available on our YouTube channel next week. If I could ask you to put your mobile phones on silent. Obviously, if you need to take it an urgent one, if you could please leave the room. For all our friends on the internet, they're all on mute and their cameras are all switched off. However, they have the facility to ask questions and participate. And if they could put them in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, that'll be great because I'll monitor all those and throw your questions into the room later. We have all produced our negative lateral flow test today, but please respect other people. COVID is still with us. So if you could socially distance as appropriate and respect other people who are around you. I shall now hand over to Leanne.
So just to run through a brief overview of the agenda, we've got, you can keep that. We've got an overview on the circular economy and we're going to cover some of the principles, a quick brief on the Senator Group, and then a quick look at a case study as far as Sustain is concerned. Sustain have been working towards the circular economy for some time. Then we're going to have a break, and then in the afternoon we're going to cover a broader look at the circular economy with talks from Andy Whyle and Chris Wilson, and then a Q&A session at the end. Okay. So Andy Whyle. There you go.
Thank you, Leanne. Thank you very much. Thank you. Let's make sure this works. Yes, we're good to go. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Leanne. Explain who I am. I am Andy Whyle. I am a sustainability specialist from my own consultancy, but I have the privilege of being IEMA's Circular Economy Network Chair, which I'll introduce to you later. There's loads of stuff about me online, and please feel free to join me on LinkedIn if you want to. Let's crack on. What we're going to talk about. First of all, part one. I'm going to split what I do into part one and part two. Part one, why should you be bothered? Why should you be interested? Basically the doom and gloom part. I'm going to cheer it up a bit about what is the circular economy, try and get you involved with that. And then part two is the happy part where we decide how to save the world with circular economy examples. So things change over time. As you can see there, mobile phones used to cards traveling about with. My father had one of those. People change over time. People now start to care, mainly due to this bloke here. He's very proactive and even more so in real life. But what's the problem? Essentially, it's population rise. Population will drive demand for everything: energy, food, water, all the resources that we take for granted. And IEMA talk about this perfect storm in 2030. I'm beginning to think that perhaps that perfect storm is arriving a bit sooner than we anticipated. And the fact that coal prices have increased, so India and China are now suffering energy shortages, so they're stopping production. Shipping, Suez supply chain blockages, we all saw that one. Container cost increases by a factor of 10 now. Shortage of containers, stop production. Labour, HGV drivers and dockers, food sector skills shortage, stop production. Politics, we're in the middle of trade agreements. Gas storage, oh God, stop production. Climate change, even in Brazil, the worst drought for 100 years, disrupting coffee, stop production. Technical revolution, this is the one. Computer chip demands exceed supply. JLR, stop production. Stop everything. This lack of scarcity, this scarcity of resources and materials leads to inflation, boom and bust economics, which I seem to remember from when I was unemployed maybe 30 years ago. We don't really want to return to that. So what's the problem specifically with technology and rare materials? Throughout modern history, most conflicts have been about fossil fuels, but now that's changing. Access to rare earth materials is now vital to future technologies. If you look at the underlying reasons for Afghanistan, there's some hidden ones there. But we need these materials for new technologies to decarbonize our society. We're talking about making a cleaner future, but we need these materials to do that. Elements for fuel cells, LEDs, PVs. So what's the challenge? Some organizations and some companies have seen this challenge for some time. So China's dominance of the global graphite supply is 64% production and 24% reserves. So we're talking about gigafactories and EVs, electrical vehicles in production in the UK. It ain't going to happen without materials. Technology and rare materials. The low carbon environmental sector is expected to grow at a predicted 11% per year for the next until 2030, which is 4 times the normal economy rate. Demand for materials can change as well. So talk about electrical vehicles. They require 4 times more copper than your normal petrol and diesel engines. Wind turbines require 5 times more copper than traditional power stations. Essentially, let's get to the end of the doom and gloom. I put it all in a risk assessment, right? We're all familiar with in the industrial sector. So I talked about resources, stuff, what's it lead to? Lack of it leads to unemployment. Unemployment leads to poverty, obesity, demographic inequality, social unrest, ultimately increased death rates. So let's put it in a, how can we fix that? Well, we've got these really handy models that we can look at. So IEMA's got this take, make, sell, use, discard model, and a bit of a circular bit going on there. Okay, that's a bit sort of get it. RICO, I should explain, I worked for RICO for 30 years until recently. We had a Comet Circle life cycle assessment, circular economy best practice example from 1994. It took people about 15 to 20 years to understand it. Yeah, and there's the famous Ellen MacArthur example we have here. A wonderful diagram that talks about technological and organic nutrient cycles, which is great. And then says at the end that you minimize systemic leakage and negative externalities. Okay, I've sort of lost the plot now. Let's try and make it a bit more simpler. So what is a circular economy? Some of the aims to keep products, components and materials looping at their highest utility and value at all times. Okay, I get that a bit more now. We need to keep the value of materials. Talks about designing out waste. I get that. Designing out pollution. Good. Maintaining material value. I can relate to that. Regenerating natural systems. Well, sort of, yeah, can. How do we take that forward? Well, we need to apply it to something. What can we apply it to? Well, you can apply it to a city or a region. There's actually European standards working towards this now. Wolverhampton is the first city in the UK to become the first circular city. You can apply it to a cluster or a network. There's a Columborg Eco-Industrial Park. It's been for many years. You can look that up if you're so inclined. There's also the Tyseley Energy Park in the West Midlands. Hang on. You can apply it to a company or a product. This is more like it. So Sensor Group do furnitures. and Rico did photocopiers. So that makes a lot more sense. I can start to relate to that. So perhaps the best place I'd start to understand the circular economy is either with my product, with my organization. Okay, so if I think about things in a mass balance sort of way, can I get a better grip of it there? So I think about my product or a company. Things come in, which is good. Things go out, which is good. Tend to be things out to customers, such as products and things. But we also get wastes out. Well, basically what you don't use. So process waste from raw materials, packaging, lost processing, defect parts, workwear or furniture. Surely the thing should be, how can we reuse these? How can we do something with them? And from the customers, if it makes sense, how do we get the stuff back so we can do something and reuse it? And ultimately, how can others reuse these things if we can't use them? So after we achieved zero waste to landfill in 2001, I wanted to move that on a bit. So I came up with something called waste to product to get people to understand that if we segregate at source, they can increase the value of the material themselves and we've got more chance of selling it to someone. So we could sell it to someone, we could use it in another process, which is a simple word for industrial symbiosis, or we could send it for recycling. Yeah, perhaps we could simplify the whole process. And we could do with this map. So we're working with IEMA to come up with more of a process flow approach, which I'll talk about later, I won't bore you with now. But it's just a simplistic way of working your way through the circular economy aspects rather than trying to understand the whole concept. And we did this because we're on a mission. I'm on a mission personally to educate box dwellers. I call them box dwellers. I can say this because I used to be a box dweller. Box dwellers wake up in the morning in a box-shaped bed, in a box-shaped room, in a box-shaped house, and they get up in the morning because they need to get up and go to work in a box-shaped car. They go off to work in the box-shaped factory and they make stuff and they generally put it in boxes, which is good. And then they go at the end of the day, clock out in their box-shaped car and go back to bed. And the next day is the same thing. Right, but then after a few years of doing this, you start to think that perhaps we could be a little more thoughtful about this. I mean, the world is round, it's circular. In fact, why can't we be more circular? So perhaps there's a different way we could take, and perhaps there's some of the different roadmaps we can follow, such as the SDGs, for example. So the learning points from this is the circular economy can be baffling and scary, but it doesn't have to be. And I would suggest it for your own development, perhaps start with something you relate to, pilot this on a product, and then deploy the learning to other products until your company becomes circular. And take bite-sized chunks to help you move through the circular economy as per the model we're going to talk about later, to save getting overwhelmed and getting lost in the whole complexity of it. And the key thing is it doesn't just apply to major corporations. You can use common sense when you start with a circle in mind. So there are solutions and business benefits that you don't yet know about, and we'll talk about those in part 2. Mark. Thank you, Mark.
Afternoon, everyone. So firstly, welcome to Miss and Fold Hotel. So this is part of the Senator Group's portfolio. So I hope you're enjoying it for those who are in the room today. I'm Mark Davis. I'm the Group Operations Director. So very briefly, 5 minutes of introductions from myself. So our aims for today, there's a number of words on the slide, but essentially it's about listening, it's about learning, it's about collaborating, it's about sharing best practice. And one of the topics, and I think Leanne said it's on the agenda later, but to demystify the buzzword around circular economy. There's a saying that goes with well-being at the moment, it's okay not to be okay. Well, I'm just going to give you a different slant for circular economy. It's okay not to know the answer. And none of us are experts in the room this afternoon. And I don't think everyone has the answer to everything, but the more heads that get together and the more forward thinking that we can be, then the bigger difference that we can make. So those are the key aims for our session this afternoon. Just a little overview of the Senator Group. So 45 years ago, it was founded by Colin Mustoe in 1976. We make office furniture. We're the UK's leading furniture manufacturer. We've got facilities all over the world, so 6 manufacturing facilities in the UK. We've got 1 in the US. We employ 1,100 people, which we're of course extremely proud of. And you can see there our carbon footprint figures for 2019 across scope 1 and 2, which Leanne is manufacturing, and our fleet. Yeah, okay. So our journey so far, we're very much on the first part of our journey as a business, as the Senator Group. So it's baby steps at this moment. We're still learning, we're educating ourselves. So just an overview as to where we currently are. So really driven by Leanne, one thing that we did at the back end of 2020 is we said, well, if we need to know what we need to do, we need to know where we want to go. So we started with the end in mind. And we said, well, what's our strategy around sustainability? Where do we want to go? And the first thing we did is earlier this year, we pledged to net zero, something we're really proud of. We've not fully worked out how we're going to get there yet, but certainly it's the ambition of the business, and the business has a track record of doing things that aren't easy. And that's what we aim to do as a team as well. So you won't be able to see this in the room, but this is our strategy. We've got 6 pillars linked to our sustainability strategy. We've focused this year on net zero, but one of them is circular economy. So of course, a topic that we're discussing as a team today. And then through Leanne, we have a diverse team from across the group, from different departments, different knowledge, different understanding, different experiences. And that team has been pulled together to really drive our objectives and our activities around our sustainability strategy. So 10 people in total. And the aim of that team really in 2020 is to educate ourselves. What can we do differently? And then how can we drive the business in looking forward to achieving our sustainability aims in 2022? So we're at the point now where we're looking at setting targets for the next year and then developing a roadmap to get to our pledge of 2030 of net zero. And I'm glad that picture's in black and white, because I've probably got the same suit and shirt on. It's obviously my go-to suit. So yeah, just to emphasize really, it's baby steps. We're on the first steps of the journey. We know it's the right thing to do. We want to do this, but no one's experts. So very much we're looking forward to this event. It's great that it's been co-hosted, and we're looking forward to discussing all the topics. Okay, so we're very proud to introduce Paul now, who manages our recycling plant, and he's got a good story to tell.
Hello, welcome. Nice to be outside of my normal settings. So good to be here, good to be out and about again. Hello to everybody who's tuned in. So I'm Paul O'Brien. I'm the recycling manager of Sustain, and Sustain is the recycling division for the Senator Group. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit today about how we started it, how it's developed, and where we are today. And hopefully you can make some links as to why that's relevant to today. Okay, so we started probably a couple of decades ago, before it was called Sustain, recycling division. We had a couple of guys part-time, and all we were doing was looking at taking the cardboard packaging waste from the internal materials that were coming in. So we were buying components and parts. All of that generating cardboard waste, and we had a couple of guys part-time. We purchased a reconditioned baler that's still in use today. It's probably not the same baler. It's had so many different parts and components replaced on it, but it's still in use. And that's kind of how it started, really. All of the waste production from all of the sites started to come through to the recycling division. So from the desking factory, the seating factory, and amongst all of the other production sites as well. So one of the things that Senator is really, really good at is innovation and continuous improvement. So we have continuous improvement teams dotted about strategically around different sites and in different cells. And we also had a scheme, we've rebranded it now, Bright Ideas, but we called it a Kaizen. And Kaizen is Japanese for continuous improvement. So we have a scheme whereby anybody in the company, upholsterers, guys in the stores, at any level in the business, they can submit a bright idea or a Kaizen idea. And if that idea is good and relevant, we'll reward and recognize it, and we'll try and implement it. And that's what's really great about Senator, really. It's, you know, we've built our success up on that. And the continuous improvement was something, the continuous improvement team looked at not only the internal packaging that was being produced in waste, but also looking at the external packaging. So a bit of a bright idea. We've got control of all of the waste that's been generated in production. What about all of the packaging that's sent out on our chairs? What about all of the packaging that's sent out on our desks and all of the furniture that we build? What can we do with that? So we looked at the waste hierarchy: reduce, reuse, recycle. And the first thing we did was design out the waste, reduce any excessive materials, only essential materials used on packaging. The other thing, I'm going to skip the reuse point and come back to that, but we needed to make sure that it was all recyclable. So we made sure that our packaging was recyclable, made sure there's some recycled content in there where relevant. And lastly, making sure that there was a mechanism in order to recycle it. So having something that's recyclable is one thing, but having it recycled is another. So how could we do this? So we've got our own transport fleet. Goes up and down the country, and we've built our business up on dealer networks, distributors. So our fleet will be delivering furniture throughout the UK. We'll offload to a dealer or distributor, offload new furniture. The dealer or distributor will then go and install the new furniture at the end user, customer, clients. And we provide the dealers and distributors with bulk bags or sustained bulk bags. And the idea is that they put the packaging, once they've installed the furniture, back into these bags, bring them back to their depot. When we come and deliver a week or two later with more new furniture, we offload that furniture. It's an empty vehicle that's always returning to us. So one of our KPIs is to always ensure that those vehicles are full when they're returned or they're carrying some sort of load. So we introduced the bag return scheme using reverse logistics. This was in 2009. When we initially started doing it, we were probably receiving about 20 cubic meter bags a month. So still quite a lot of packaging. If you think bubble wrap and shrink wrap, that'd be quite a lot. Wouldn't fit in the boot of your car. But now we've moved on to a point where we're probably receiving over 10,000 cubic meter bags a year annually. And what that allows us to actually do is actually reuse the packaging. So it's not all about recycling and destroying it and shredding it and compacting it. If you all look at your tables, you've got some polystyrene corners on there, you can see them. So these polystyrene corners, they go out on the new furniture, they come back in the bags. My team will sort through any packaging that can be reused, anything that's suitable. And what we do with those corners is we started dotting them, putting a little dot on it with a marker, very simple system, sending it back down to production. That'll go back out onto a desktop or a panel or a tabletop to protect the corners of the furniture. Goes back out, the furniture gets installed, goes back in a bag, comes back to us again. It's already got a dot on it, so we'll put another dot on it, we'll send it back out again, and we'll keep putting dots on these corners. Very simple system, but very circular. So I actually got a call from one of the furniture installers from the South team, who was in Southampton. I don't get involved too much in terms of installing new furniture. So it was a bit of a surprise to get a call from him, but the senior fitter, as I'll call him, was Matt Pauly. He called me up and I thought, oh no, there's a problem here. You know, I don't normally get involved with this. There must be something gone wrong. And he just phoned me up just to tell me that he'd found a corner with 7 dots on it. And he was just really excited to tell me about it. So it's really good, and it just shows that it goes right throughout the field team, throughout production, throughout the offices, and everybody's really invested in it in the Senator Group. So it's not just polystyrene corners, it's other plastic, there's Netlon, there's other bits and pieces, and we'll try and reuse as much of that packaging as possible. So to put a value on it, for people to kind of get their head around it and put it into context, the saving a year is between £8,000 and £10,000 a year of packaging is saved. That's not the reason that we do it. But one thing that I got asked this year is how much packaging have we actually reused since 2009? And I was quite staggered to find out that it was nearly 2 million, over 1.8 million pieces of packaging have been reused. So it's been brought back to Senator and we've reused it on more new packaging. So that's something to be really proud of. So what happens to packaging that can't be reused? So recycling. So what happens to polystyrene? Polystyrene is the scourge of the environment. A lot of people will say it's terrible, it fills up bins, it's 90% air, it's light, takes up loads of space, loads of volume. Well, because of our transport fleet, bringing back the polystyrene, we don't really have to pay any transport costs because those vehicles are returning anyway. So we can kind of tick that problem. But if we can't reuse it, we need to do something with it. And we've actually got a machine that's called a polypress. And what it does is it compresses the polystyrene and removes a lot of the air. So if we took an Arctic trailer, a 40-foot Arctic trailer of polystyrene, or expanded polystyrene, to use its correct term, it would be 90% air, 95% air, and it would weigh about half a ton. A full trailer, big 40-foot trailer, weigh about 500 kilograms. We can compress that down into briquettes to just over a cubic meter. So if you just see on your tables, if you want that big block of big sugar cube is on your tables there, if you try and lift that up, you'll just see just how heavy that is. That's actually polystyrene. So quite heavy. So effectively, we can recycle, we can compress an Arctic trailer's worth of polystyrene down into a cubic meter. We probably do about 50 Arctic trailers worth of polystyrene a year. It's about 25 ton. And the reason we compress it is so we can transport it. We want to transport it to a local supplier. The local supplier will granulate it. And does anybody remember, hands up, anybody remember Play-Doh as a kid? Hands up, hands up, hands up. Liars, get your hands up. Does anybody remember the Play-Doh factory? Play-Doh factory? You put your Play-Doh into the chamber and you pull the lever down. It squirts out big sausages, star shapes. That's what these guys do, except it's not sausages they're making with the polystyrene. They make things like beams for park benches, beading, composite decking. So if somebody's had the decking done this summer, it's probably polystyrene. Cladding at major supermarkets, it's all polystyrene. So it's really good that it's getting used into another product. And then what do we do with the other materials? So we've got shrink wrap and cardboard. So shrink wrap is LDPE. We can bale up about 400 kilograms it would be, if you think how much bubble wrap that is into a cubic meter. It's quite a lot. We do about 450 bales a year. That'll get shredded and flaked and turned back into pellets and reprocessed and turned back into more shrink wrap. It might be turned back into building materials. There's lots of different uses for it, but it definitely doesn't go to landfill. And then cardboard, we probably receive more cardboard than anything else. So there's 1,200 bales, so they're about half a ton each, these bales, and that's what the image is showing there. It's about 600 tons annually of cardboard that we recycle, which is quite some tonnage. Cardboard will just get repulped into more cardboard. So what can we do in terms of the circular economy? What can we do with our packaging? So I would like to see the LDPE, the shrink wrap and bubble wrap, go back into the supply chain. That would be the ideal. There's a lot of challenges with that that we'll discuss later. We've got a Q&A session. I would like to see the cardboard go back to the supply chain as well. But if it was that easy, we'd already be doing it. So it's how can we look at those challenges and how can we find solutions to that? And then the same for the expanded polystyrene. How can we get that back into the supply chain? And then the other thing is not forgetting that there's other alternative materials to use for packaging, but it's also understanding the life cycle analysis of those. So just because it's not plastic, it doesn't necessarily mean it's greener. So it's having a full understanding of the life cycle analysis for what materials we're going to use, and not just doing it, not just changing our minds just to make it, just to tick a box. We want to make sure it's the right thing. So the second part of what I'm going to discuss is the furniture recycling service. So again, we produce lots of office chairs, lots of desks, lots of cupboards, pedestals, probably doing it an injustice, but we produce a lot of furniture, a lot of really nice office furniture. And that furniture is going to be going into either office buildings or wherever. And the chances are there's going to be some existing furniture there. Not everything is going to be going into a new build. So what happens with that? What happens with that furniture, that legacy furniture, that redundant furniture? So again, we would use our own transport fleet. We're delivering out. We can use a returning wagon that's empty. Let's fill it up with some of the redundant, unwanted furniture. We set the scheme up in 2009, and again, it was a value-added service that it was the right thing to do. We've not been pressured into doing it. There's no government levies with this. This is something that we decided to do off our own backs. We started probably receiving 20 operator chairs a month, and now we're at numbers of 60 to 70,000 items of furniture a year. So it's an absolute mind-boggling number when you think about how much furniture that's coming back to our facility, and we ensure that none of that goes to landfill. So what do we do with it? Our first option isn't to recycle. We are a recycling centre, but it's not about recycling. We will try and reuse it in terms of donating. We've donated hundreds of items of furniture recently, the last few weeks, to schools, charities, social enterprises, trying to get the reuse, trying to keep the value in it, trying to make a use out of it. There's a church on the streets here, which is in Burnley. These guys needed some stacking chairs. We received 150 stacking chairs from a university. clearly very used, very worn, but the guys at Church on the Streets, which is a charity, it runs lots of classes and for vulnerable people, and it was really good for them. So we went and dropped them off, we donated, we installed the furniture, and they can stack them away when they're finished. So it was really useful for them. That's 150. We don't normally get charities taking that much. It's normally 3s and 4s, 3 or 4 chairs, a couple of tables. And then we've also got to be mindful of the liability as well around what we're sending out there and considerations around that. So if we can donate it, we will. If there's options to donate it, we will. The problem is a lot of the furniture that we get is end-of-life furniture. A lot of the value, a lot of the good furniture will have been taken before we even get to it. The customers have probably sold it on the second-hand market. So this is just a typical day at Sustain. So that is about 700, 800 chairs, operator chairs. And then at the left, there's a load of stacking chairs. So it's probably closer to 1,200 chairs there. And that's just a typical day at Senator. So Senator Sustain. So a lot of these are redundant, they're end of life, and we need to recycle them. And we'll probably clear that area a couple of times a week. So what do? We dismantle it down to its raw materials, the furniture. So take an operator chair, office chair, we'll remove the foam and the fabric. The foam will get compressed, we'll bale it up, and then that will end up to a local company who will granulate it and extrude it into cap underlay. So that's a good story. The fabrics, we remove the fabrics and all the fabric offcuts from production as well. They get baled up. They'll end up in car acoustics, like behind car dashboards, mattress filling, animal bedding, and even stuffing for punch bags. Plastics. We mainly get 2 hard plastics: nylon and polypropylene. Nylon is usually the 5-star bases on the bottom of an office chair. A really tough material. So what we do is we're trying to condense it and make it as heavy as possible, and we'll chop them up and we'll move them onto a local supplier who will granulate and reprocess them into new products. Polypropylene. So polypropylene is usually found on the back of an office chair. So again, if we're receiving 60,000 items of furniture a year, about half of those are office chairs. So you're looking at 30 to 35,000 office chairs a year getting recycled. How many chair backs, plastic chair backs are on there? We need to shred it, condense it, make it heavy to be able to be transported to a local supplier. And I've actually got some jars on the tables as well. There's a £5 in one of them if you want to have a look. So what happens with these? What happens with the polypropylene? So the polypropylene is moved to a local supplier. They'll get melted and extruded or injection molded. And whilst this is a bit gimmicky, it's a bit cheesy, there's some drinks coasters on the table as well. If you have a look, these are actually made from our plastics, and it's more of the little black coasters there. And these are made from our very own plastic. So we did this 3 or 4 years ago. It was really difficult to find a supplier who would take our own recycled plastic and turn it into those. But it does show that there are people out there and companies out there who are willing to do it. But it was a very limited market. We had to jump through a lot of hoops and and make a lot of phone calls to find someone who would do it. What I do with these is I give these back to customers who've sent chairs back to us to recycle. So it's just a nice way of saying this used to be your office chair. This is what's happened with it. Wooden furniture, we probably recycle 4,500 tons of material through Sustain every year, and about half of that is wood. The wooden furniture is dismantled, the metals and plastics are removed from it. And then we have 2 shredders, we call them hoggers, shredders, same thing. And what happens is they'll either go into biomass fuel. So we have an extraction system at our Deskin factory. It'll take all of the dust extraction and that'll be used in our very own biomass burner that heats the factory. Some of the other shredded wood ends up in animal bedding, but actually some of it ends up to one of the main board panel manufacturers in the UK that supply us with panels to make our new furniture. So there is some circularity in there. Whilst it's not a closed loop, there is definitely an element of that, and that's a really good story to share with you, and it shows that it's already happening. So talking about furniture, what could we do? Again, for me, being at the end of the line, I would like to see the industry looking at getting the polymers, the wood, the fabrics, and the foams back into the supply chain. In terms of the foam from chairs, we're already in discussions with our supplier to try and get that material back, and that would be really good if we could do something with that. Same with the fabrics and the wood, we're already doing a little bit of that, circularity. And then the polymers, again, we are in discussions with our suppliers already. We've done some trials. But what we don't want to do is compromise the quality of our chairs with recycled content. All of the chairs that we recycle aren't all necessarily Senator. We don't always know the composition of the plastics, and we wouldn't want to compromise the quality of the structures of the chairs. So there is a lot of challenges there, but we are already on with it. And which brings us on to my third and final part, which is remanufacturing. So we do remanufacture furniture. We've done over 10,000 items of furniture in the last few years. Our capabilities are around looking at Senator products, so we can remanufacture our own Senator products. So it might be replacing gas lifts, it might be replacing casters, different components, recovering, reupholstering, refoaming. We can do that. We can do desktops, we can resize, but there's always a cost versus sustainability. So a lot of the questions I get asked around remanufacturing, people think they're going to save money. Now, sometimes they might, depending on the product, but also alternatively, sometimes a desk, if you need it resizing and reshaping, that could potentially be more expensive than a new desk. The new desks are relatively cheap at the moment. So you've got the cost versus the sustainability. So there's a lot of factors to consider. So this is a typical meeting chair, cantilever chair. We've recovered it. There you go, Bob's your uncle. Nice and easy. Reupholstered, cleaned up, good to go. This is something that's non-Senator, but this was out of one of the tourist attractions in London. This is actually out of the Barbican. And this is one of the reception chairs there. So we were asked to have a look at that. You can see it looks pretty tired. Looks like it's from the 70s, probably my nan's living room or something. But we were asked to do something with that, you know, restain it and recover it, bring it a bit more up to date. They're structurally sound, really good chairs. So we've begun the process, we sanded it down, removed the lacquers and the varnishes, we unpicked the fabric, we restained the frames, we created a fabric template, we went through the cutting stations and the sewing process and made sure it was, we created a prototype and then we could scale it up. And that was the finished product, which I think looks a lot better. Really smart, really pleased, everyone's really happy with that. Here's another one, another case study, did a university down in the southwest. Banquet seating, not our specialty, bit of a nightmare if I'm honest, but we did it, we like a challenge. We brought it back using reverse logistics, back up to the factory, followed the same process, reupholstered it, and there we go. Some choice colours, but they were really pleased with it, looks a lot better. And then finally, my last case study is actually, if you just stand up, please, I'll just stand up and just have a look at the chairs that you sat on. All of the chairs in this room have been restained and remanufactured and recovered and refoamed. This is a working example of what can be done. So everything here that you sat on has been remanufactured. So a little party piece for you there. And I'm just going to finish on this. So the phrase resting on your laurels dates back to ancient Greek and Roman traditions where victorious Olympians or generals wore crowns made of laurel wreaths as a victory, as a symbol of victory, success and status. So I'm really proud of what we've done at Senator in terms of sustainability and in terms of sustain and all of the things that we've implemented, but there's an awful lot that we still need to do. And I just think, you know, collaboratively, we need to work together in taking this forward and really network. And I think it's not something we can be a lone wolf about. So I think if we can work together, I think there's a lot more opportunity out there and there's a lot more work that we still need to be done. So we don't want to rest on our laurels. But yeah, and that's everything. So thanks for listening. I think we're going to have a little break now, probably 15 minutes. If you just want to grab yourself a coffee and another pastry, I might be grabbing one. I'll leave you to it. Thanks very much. Okay.
Okay, welcome back. We're just going to go to Andy Whyle now, who's going to talk about demystifying the circular economy for us.
Yes, thank you, Leanne. Right, hope you enjoyed the coffee and the pastries. Moving on then, go to part 2, demystifying the circular economy. Should fess up first of all, it's not just me, it's not the Andy Whyle show. I do have an amazing team behind me. We have Ben Goodwin, IEMA's head of policy. We have a steering group of expert practitioners that are incredibly proactive, and we're now covering all the development authorities and even internationally. And we're working on the next phase of the model that I'll talk about in a moment. We're looking at the construction sector, and I've got some practitioners. The key thing here is these are all practitioners. The people actually do it, they've grazed their knees, they've fallen over, got back up again. So we can learn from the mistakes, and that's all part of the process. Some of the other things we do as well is we sit on the ISO technical committee. We're looking at creating with the BSI standards on circular economy at the moment. We also sit on DEFRA resources target setting, and we've just taken part in the overall IEMA governance as well, as part of continuous improvement. I should say there's, for all IEMA members and those that aren't, there are resources available on the website, and there's a number of websites, webinars, which I'll talk about in a minute. Let's go back to those models for a second. They're all lovely, they're great, and but it shows some respect. A lot of work has gone into these. Academics, organisations have put a lot of thought into these, and they brilliantly cover the concept and get people involved. But it's this sort of thing that doesn't get everybody on board with it. And to that, we need to take it to the masses if we're going to get this to work. So again, revisiting what is the circular economy, for me, to make it simple, it's really about designing out waste and then maintaining material value, as Paul explained earlier on. So within this model itself, we try to make it practitioner's process flow. So you start off with sustainable design, you engage with suppliers on returnable packaging, for example. You decide what your resources are, whether virgin or recycled material. You build into sustainable business process. You work with your consumers, your customers on remanufacturing. We'll talk about that in a minute. And then your whole process of reducing your waste, reusing it in your organization, then recycling it, all these aspects. But the point being, it comes back to sustainable design. And this was the big learning point. I started off, when I first started to put this model together, I started off in the middle at the sustainable business process. But a whole learning point came to me from these ladies here, Sophie Thomas and Suzanne Baker, absolute legends in the design of circular economy. Sophie Thomas worked with the RSA on something called the Great Recovery. Within that, there are 4 design models. First of all, longevity. Do you design it to last longer? Which seems a strange concept as an organization that sells stuff, but we'll talk about that later. Leasing or servitization. Do I lease it to you? And then when the contract ends, do I get it back? Why would I want to do that? Okay, we'll talk about that later. And then remanufacturing. So that sees components replaced. We'll talk about that in a minute. And then ultimately, as Paul said, recycling. Coming back to that, that should be the last we should be looking at. If you want to know more about it, we did an excellent webinar, or they did an excellent webinar on CE design, getting it right from the start, which is available as a link there. But to get people involved with this, instead of talking cycles, loops, comet circles, you can just ask some simplistic questions. Instead of a biological technical nuclear cycle, how can we minimize systemic leakage and negative external? How are you going to take that? Who's going to understand that? So you can just actually replace it with what I call the 5 R's: refuse, return, reduce, reuse, and recycle. First of all, is it actually needed? Can it be used again? Do you actually need so much of it? Right? If you can't use it, can someone else? And that could be in your own organization or outside your organization, as the way it stands. And ultimately, can it be turned back into what it was or something else? Now, this model, I was just thinking, actually, this model came out in December last year. It's 10 months, but the best feedback I got from this when we launched it is that this is the sort of thing that I can put on my high vis, take to the shop floor and explain it to somebody, get them on board with it. Just going back a second, the key thing, we'll talk about getting the masses involved with this, getting the people in your organization, not just the specialists and the academics. If we're going to get cultural change embedded, especially the Kaizen aspects, and I'll come on to that in a minute, getting embedded into that, So people start to generate their own ideas that can help your organization become more circular. Because I come from a Kaizen culture myself, and it was always believed that the experts of the process are the people who do it every day. They're the ones who spot the best opportunities that cost you least. So this is some of the biggest costs for any organization is the raw materials they buy in. I used to, many years ago, worked in a toner plant, and we did toner waste recycling. Up to 30%, there's a 70% yield, so 30% waste in some of the toners that we made. So it's a big, massive waste. And from the data capture, we started to understand that this was a cost as well. The biggest cost to most organizations, the stuff they buy in, as I've said, if you can reuse some of that back in the process, you're going to make massive savings instantly. So we brought a compactor and worked on crushing it down so we could take it from a 3% recycling rate up to 17%. And in the first year, you saved £295,000. Not bad. Again, as I've just said, the organic nature of generating ideas in an organization. So this is imported toner packaging for the color toners that we brought in. They came in from Japan. Color toner is very expensive, so we put in very, very good packaging, right? And the point was, when it got here, we just collapsed the packaging and threw it away. Well, didn't throw it away, we recycled it, sorry, so the cardboard got recycled. The key thing here is a black polypropylene pallet. Recycling it, that's good. We were doing the right thing. We put it in the baler, right, crushed it down, sold it on as PP, got some money from it. Was that the best value we could get from it? I think not, because what we found was the guys in the recycling centre started reusing this packaging instead of the stuff that we were buying in to ship our stuff out. So I popped down and said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Well, it's better than the stuff we use. Why don't we use it?" I thought, well, why not? It's a good idea. And then our product engineers also noticed what they were doing, and they said, "What's going on here?" So they said, "Yeah, these are really good. Hang on, so why are we giving them to you when we can use them in the production area and put our finished goods on them, and then perhaps we can use them again?" So we talk about data capture as well. So it wasn't until the end of the year, this was all brilliant ideas. We were all slapping ourselves on the back saying, what a wonderful time we're having. But it wasn't until the data capture did the packaging waste at the end of the year. And I thought, just a minute, we could be doing something with this. Has anybody actually captured the data? So worked out in 2015 that we imported 12,500 of these. 2,500 were no good, damaged in the container shipping as they came across the oceans. No problem, off they went for recycling. 10,000 were actually reused and shipped off with the finished goods to our distribution centre in Holland. That's wonderful. What does that mean? I asked in SCM, or the supply chain management department, sorry, what's the cost of the pallet? What are you paying for these? And he said £28. I said, that's £280,000 a year saved in new pallets. Has anybody ever thought of that? No, it's just a hidden cost, hidden saving now. That became a best practice case study for Plastics Europe. When I ended up going to Vienna, the halls of Vienna to present it, funnily enough. And it was until the other week that I started to thought, what's the carbon savings for this? We talk about net zero now and how waste can be a contributor to that. So I started to look it up and worked out that, bizarrely, that is a carbon savings of 196 tons a year, just from an idea that came from the guys in the recycling centre. You can get forced to do change as well. So this little thing here, a toner cap, there's an RFID chip that was placed on top of that. And a few years after the WE regs came in, we were exempt for a few years, and then bang, it came in. This was classed as waste electronic equipment. We suddenly found that we had nowhere to put this. And the key thing about achieving, as explained earlier, zero waste to landfill is when you haven't got a solution, you have to store it somewhere until you have a solution. So we used up our warehouse space, and then we ran out of that. So we employed some other off-site warehouse space, and the cost started to build up. We looked at some very expensive solutions, but just by discussing and working in partnership with your suppliers and your solution providers, we came up with this, what you can see here, and that's basically a fridge recycling plant. And we said to them, well, you're not listening. We make toner caps. We don't make fridges. They said, bear with us. Right, we can have a look at the process, see what we can do. So why don't we just stop making fridges for a second and batch your stuff through the process and see what happens? And what happens is you get polyprop out of the other end, which you can sell, much like the seats that we mentioned earlier, to make things like coat hangers. So we end up with a zero waste landfill solution from a bizarre thing we'd never considered. Again, has anybody calculated what the savings are for this? Well, there's a 77% cost reduction, £92,000 saved, just by thinking outside the box. So again, within this model, we're taking it. It's about practical application and building that in. But Paul mentioned reverse logistics earlier on. I said I'd explain this to Leanne. Essentially, it's getting stuff back from the customers. And this is what this part of the model looks at in terms of getting stuff back, bringing it to an assessment centre, which like Paul's explaining for Senator. Then you make it a decision. Do you just reuse them? The chairs are any good. Do you remanufacture them? They're not that bad and we can make them better. Or are they just no good and we can take the parts off and reuse them again? Or ultimately, can we just send it for recycling? And that's exactly what we do at Rico with photocopiers. We manufactured them, we demanufactured them once the end of the contract came, and then we remanufacture. One thing I would say is perhaps make it a differentiator, because what we did with these is, you can see that one over there, we put a nice decal on the front, right, showing that we're eco-friendly, and there's a nice way of saving the planet by doing this, but it's a differentiator. The process was to bring them back, we remanufacture them. Remanufacturing the term actually came from us challenging this as a process because we used to create recycling machines and our competitors were there doing exactly the same thing. We were taking these apart. We'd take out all the first life mortality parts, which we recognized for the engineering process and trials. Those were instantly replaced. Then we'd quality assess the rest of the machine to make sure it'd go on for another life. Brilliant. It then went through the same quality control process. Right, so it had to go through the 9001 process and get sent off to the customer with the same thing because it went with a warranty. The competitors got out Mr. Sheen and the cloth and just gave it over and called it recycling. So we got a bit fed up with that. So we approached the BSI and came up with this new standard for remanufacturing. But the point being, it goes out as a new product with a warranty. That's the differentiator again. So that's good. Those machines are good. Can we take it to other parts? So for the consumables that we made for the factories, the cartridges, the all-in-one units, we had a department that built those and we started bringing them back. Again, the operators in the area noticed these ferrite bars that we had. And one of the engineering process initially was to take that out and throw it away, right? Send it for recycling. But again, the operator was saying, like, actually, there's nothing wrong with this. It just looks all right. Can we reuse it again? And the answer was yes, if it met the quality standard. Right? If it was good enough, use it again, because they cost £13 each. So that made business sense, actually. What about these tubes? The tubes that go in a copier made from aluminium, right? Typically, after they come back from the customer, the coating on them is no good. It's been used hundreds of thousands of times. But the core itself, there's nothing wrong with that. So why don't we come up with the process of stripping the chemicals off the core and reusing the core? That's the bulk of what it is. Savings, £61,000 a year. This all seems like good business sense, doesn't it? Why don't we make a whole department out of it where we get these things back from all over Europe, get 55 tons a month, saving €2 million a month? That's a good idea. Why don't we do that? So we did. And then we expanded the whole range of copiers. The thing for me was that's all great, saves money. You get a 40% cost saving, which can get transferred to the customer. So it makes them more likely to want to remanufacture machine, but you get a 28% less of an environmental impact across the life cycle by reusing this machine. So it's good for the life cycle environment as well. I was able to take, using this, all this information, I was actually working with an engineer because nobody understood the comet circle. It was just something we did. Yeah, but I was able to take this and say that the top part why don't we just call that the linear economy that we used to do, the take, make, and make it into parts. But then now we have the ability to bring it back to our green centers. We can remanufacture the machines. If the machines are no good, we can harvest the parts from them. If the parts are no good, then we send them off through the recycling center, off away to be recycled. And you've extended the life cycle and the value of all these materials in the process. We're not the only ones who are doing this. Since I've been working on my own and we've come across a few more examples. This is a company I'm working with in Litchfield, getting to improve their circular logistics and reuse. So plastic film comes on massive rolls, requires plastic and chipboard end plates. There's hundreds of thousands of them going across transport across the UK at the moment. The average cost of replacement of an end plate is £3.50, but it only costs £1.72 to get it back and reuse it. So that's a 51% saving. And the average cost of replacement of plastic end plate is £15. It costs £2.20 to get it back. So that, again, it's a business no-brainer to do this. 85% saving. Another company I'm working with, have you ever imagined how they can still make films, or you can still go on holiday, or university campuses tested for COVID? Right, there is a company that does it, but they wear lab coats. Obviously, the lab coats need washing on a regular basis. We'll get to the point where they throw them away, so they're just disposing of them. £25 a pop, these are. They were sent for incineration. Now with this process, they're washed and repaired through an NHS-approved process, which is good. What does that mean? That's cost £5 to do that, so that's £20 savings, £208,000 a year. Yeah, and a massively, this is what did my tree in the other week when I actually did the calculation, saved 13 tons of waste, and that is 196 tons of carbon, because the carbon impact of textiles is mind-blowing. It's like a 14:1 ratio. Kaizen, this actually came out as a Kaizen example at Rico, where I first come across this company and won the Ideas UK Award for Sustainability. Worked on the basis that we were throwing all these PPE gloves away at the end of the shifts. But unbelievably, lots of companies do that. It's like, issue you a pair of gloves at the end of the shift, can't be asked, throw it away. If you actually capture that, send them off for rewashing, we worked out that we could save £15,000 a year. We had 600 to 700 employees. If you go to a much larger organisation, such as, or the gloves are made from more expensive, like Kevlar, for example, like Adar Glass, £121,000 savings from washing gloves. It's not overly technical, is it? Just knowing what is it. And there's loads of companies doing this now. Michelin tyres, on the trucks you see around the road, they don't own them, they're leased to the truck owners, right? So that when it comes to the end of life, they get them back and they remanufacture them. Is it a new idea? I think it came out in the 1920s. Netflix don't actually physically make anything, do they? They just stream stuff to your house, and it replaces all those CDs, all those videotapes. Betamax, who remembers Betamax? 75 million subscribers globally, valued at $25 billion. And we talked about longevity. Davec umbrellas, what do? They over-engineer these umbrellas. God, I wish I had one today. It's engineered for ultimate durability. If it fails, they will replace it. But I was looking at Tilly hats the other day, right? Lifetime guarantees, right? If it doesn't last, they will replace it because they have such confidence that they built and engineered that, over-engineered that into the product. Colour reel, one of the last things that I was looking at when Rico was this, which actually, again, blew my mind. Imagine all the different colour cottons that go into making something like that. That was replaced with a single white cotton and computer-controlled inkjet head sprayed ink on at the appropriate moment to make a pattern like that. Cuts out an immense amount of waste in the textile process. Carbon neutral remanufactured laptops. Even laptops are now manufactured. My phone, various other things that I own in the house are from remanufactured sites. But this company now looks at also offsetting by planting 5 trees. One of the other things I've come across recently, look away now. This is the Jinan Xiaobin Eco Farm as a circular food solution, which takes in 200 tons of food waste sludge processed per day. That's fed to 1 billion cockroaches. Cockroach waste is used as fertilizer, which is good. What happens to the cockroaches? Well, they die eventually, and they're fed to chickens. And then chickens make eggs and ultimately could end up in the restaurants. Fully circular food. So it doesn't have to apply just to the things we take for granted every day. I'm currently working with Sustainability West Midlands, which is where I met Leanne at RWM the other week. We're on a bit of a resource revolution demystification tour. So we talk about circular economy and net zero in sort of terms that people can understand, taking away the whole concepts that make people afraid of the circular economy and bringing it down to simple questions. And so to sum up then, the strategy is to develop sustainable business to maintain materials for productivity. We recognize the resource risks. You need to improve the skills of the people involved. You're innovating alternative materials. You're increasing the entire value chain of materials of the circular models. You're diversifying what you do. And it's actually, if you're speaking in the boardroom, a phrase to use could be building a strategic future planning model for your organization. Because the result is business and customers now begin to grasp this as a strategic issue. You get reduced environmental impact of operation, you extend the life cycle of materials, resulting in increased ability to maintain future business continuity. For me, that is sustainability. I don't just talk cash, I do a few other things as well. I actually advise the Wildlife Trust on a few things. So that the sustainability as a whole is much wider than this. But we were saying earlier that cash is a language that most people speak, right? And you can take that into a boardroom, get anybody on board, whether they're climate disbelievers or whatever, it doesn't matter, money talks. And this is ultimately about sustainability being a business continuity issue. In part one, I talked about availability of materials. In part two, I talked about the cost savings that you can make, and we talked about business survivability, didn't we, earlier on? These are two aspects that can be taken to improve the business continuity of any organization. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. My name is Chris Wilson. I'll just put the slides on. So thank you for having me. Leanne kindly volunteered me a few weeks ago, so I had to come and talk to you. So I guess I'm picking up at the tail end of things. We've covered a lot of the concepts, the principles, and I'm just going to try and pick up on some things that perhaps haven't been covered. So there'll be quite a bit of information that hopefully it's been mentioned already, but it provides a bit of a recap, a bit of a refresh. And for those who are perhaps new to things, then it gives you further sources of information. My background's in environmental science. I spent a lot of time working in the waste industry and energy and in law and compliance as well. So there's quite a lot of those issues that we've talked about already. So I think it sort of lends itself to being able to cover quite a lot of those ideas. So we've just a few slides really on the contents. We've talked a lot about jargon, and I'm afraid there's a little bit more to come. And it's one of those things we just have to accept, I think. And also, I think Mark mentioned as well that there's never a point where you should be bewildered. We're all kind of bewildered at times, but also I think there's solace in the fact that it's slowly becoming a little bit clearer as well. So there's lots of terms that have been used up there. You might be familiar with some, others you might not be, but in effect, they're all mostly doing the same thing, some from different angles, different concepts. Some focus more on resources and waste. Some focused on broader sort of corporate issues. Things like ESG are becoming a popular term now. Science-based target initiatives aligned with net zero, etc. There's all linkages with circular economy. Some of these go back to the 1940s. So they're not new concepts. Industrial ecology, for instance, was in the 1940s when businesses were looking to establish their premises close to where their resources would be extracted from. Similarly, industrial symbiosis, where businesses
work together with other businesses who could make use of their wastes and share their assets and resources. And lots of these terms get hijacked a little bit by, I don't know if there's any marketers or PR people in the room, but sometimes that's what we do. We try and sell these concepts with new phrases, terminology, but ultimately they're all about doing the same thing. And for me, the circular economy is sort of expressed as a noun, but I think it's really a verb, and there isn't really an end goal. I think that will always be different. So it's easy to say this is a circular product, and there might be circular elements to it, circular facets to it, but then there's always going to be something that it has to evolve into. So it's a spectrum that you'll be further along in some areas than others, and probably what today's idea of a circular product will be different tomorrow. And that's just something we have to kind of get our heads around and evolve with and look at better ways of doing things. Again, we mentioned some of this, but some new facts and figures perhaps had not been mentioned before, but I just did some research in terms of the past 100 years to make the point about the increased demand we have on resources globally. So construction materials used by increased factor of 34 times between 1900 and year 2000, 34 times increased. Ores and minerals by 27 times, fossil fuels by 12, biomass 3.5. Now, if we factor in the population growth at that time, so it was about 1.6 billion in 1900 and about 6 billion in the year 2000, that's a 3.75 increase. But actually, overall, we're using resources at 8 times that. So we're outstripping population growth, the demand, commercialization, the demand is going way beyond just a pure population issue. And that's really underpinned by different waves. If we look at different waves of human activity, going back to industrial revolution, etc., where we had mechanization, and then we had the railroads, then we had the internal combustion engine, 1896. By the year 1900, there was 25,000 cars on the road. Within 4 years, that's quite rapid growth. And then now we probably have over 1 billion cars, 1.2 billion, I think the latest figure is. Mobile phones, those were referenced. So they are in many ways a great example of dematerialization, where they've got more and more features and functions. The original mobile phones probably had 10 to 12 materials in them. Now there's probably 60 different metals alone. So we've got increased functionality there. We've got emails, videos, text messages, various apps and other calculators, clocks, etc., etc. We can do pretty much anything from a handheld device now. It doesn't really reduce the number of devices that we have. We still have loads, don't we, in the house? We've probably got, there's latest research suggests about 5 kilograms of electronic items. So we still have the phone, the iPad, the smartwatch, the tracker, etc., etc. I think there's about 72 on average electronic items per household in the UK, and 11, 12 of those are actually broken or not wasted. So there's a big challenge there in terms of getting those materials back out of kitchen drawers and into the market again. Following on from Industrial Revolution, we had obviously the developments post World War II with and the growth there with cheap supply of natural resources, etc. We had use of petrochemicals, other sectors growing. And then we had the IT revolution, and we're probably into a sixth potential wave of industrialization. And really, all of those were underpinned by cheap resources, whereas that's a bit of a problem now. We don't have those cheap resources available. The EU, in their wisdom, identified various critical resources going back a number of years ago, and they identified critical being the fact that their suitability and their storage and their usability were important and critical to economic development. And they identified 14 different materials, some of which you might recognize for those who've got a bit of chemistry background, others perhaps not have heard of. In actual fact, when we look at PGMs, that's platinum metal groups, there's 6 or 7 of those, I think. Rare earth elements, there's 17 of those. So there's a lot more in there than purely the list of 14. But many of these technical resources come from politically unstable parts of the world, where there might be wars or other conflicts, where there might be a tendency to hoard materials. And there's a lot of that going on right now. Countries are preparing for future resource constraints and demands. So that's a big challenge to beat. And if you're not convinced that there's a big enough challenge, and there are lots of other drivers as well in terms of, talked about climate change, and there can be conflicts with climate change, and you might save on resources, but increase in greenhouse gases. And we'll look at some of those examples. A company the size of Senator will be well used to the reporting pressures that there are now through company size reporting, and those are just growing every year. We've come out of the EU with Brexit, but there's new directives coming through from Europe that the UK are adopting. EU taxonomy, corporate sustainability reporting requirements are coming in, and these were always there for the past 10 years anyway, but they weren't explicit to sustainability, to climate, to resource risks. We were told to report non-financial matters, but we were sort of left to our own devices as to what those matters would be. And now we're being told you've got to tell us what your climate risks are, what your resource risks are. So all of that is out in the public domain. It's all out in the open. Clearly, we also have customer pressures and, I guess, supply chain pressures as well, which will not only impact large, but all the way through the supply chain. And we've obviously seen with recent cost of materials for fuels, but anyone who's done any kind of DIY work at home has been struggled to get materials, and the prices have been astronomically high. Wood, for instance, has gone up quite a bit, as I'm sure you guys know as well. And legal drivers, again, linked to reporting, but also other schemes as well around doing energy audits and identifying greenhouse gases, and voluntary commitments around net zero, which you guys have committed to, which is not an insignificant task. All set within the context of the business growing, I assume, over the next few years is the plan. You don't intend to shrink and just close the doors. So again, you've got to get better with and grow more, but with less. That's quite a challenge. So I think in kind of summary for me, it's you've got to do this. It's not a case of it being a nice to have. It's change, or someone will change you either through customer demand, cost demands, reporting demands, legal demands, etc. And again, there's lots to keep you occupied in terms of policy context that's going on. This is just picking up a dozen or so of the issues that are going on in England right now. We seem to have a bit of a policy gap with Brexit, etc., over the past few years, and then with COVID, etc. But there's lots coming down the track in terms of extended producer responsibility for packaging. Plastic tax is coming in next April. So we've got 30% of our plastic products having recycled content of 30%. We've got the deposit return scheme for drinks containers. We've probably seen the right to repair in the news. So when consumers will have a right to have their products repaired, white goods, televisions, etc. It's only really when you get into the detail you sort of see what those obligations will be. And in actual fact, some of the law is quite weak on this in my view. Ultimately, probably lead to it being quite expensive to repair some items. If your heat element goes in your dishwasher, you'll probably also have to replace the pump because there's no rules around grouping products together. So in many ways, a lot of the design requirements that we've called for aren't really there yet. A lot of these focus on end of solution issues, waste issues. A lot of the circular economy package the UK government brought out was to reduce landfill, which is way down the track, really, isn't it? There wasn't much in terms of design. If we look at the packaging regulations, there's the sister of those regulations look at the recycled content of packaging. So they can't have any toxic metals, etc. They've got to be recyclable, and they've got to be minimum for the use. But the number of prosecutions, probably 2 or 3 since they came out in the late 90s. And that's just because in there at the very end of the clause it says subject to consumer acceptance. So what does that mean? Probably means if you don't complain about an overpackaged product, then it's okay. So again, I think we could do a lot better on that. So in terms of we've talked about some of the challenges. I think as this is kind of a call to those who are involved in groups and steering committees, talking to the government, etc., that we've quite a local perspective on things, and that seems to be getting worse for me. Devolution and Brexit and COVID, we're looking at things in a smaller and smaller scale all the time. There's more difference with other regions and sectors, etc. So that makes it difficult to have a coordinated resources strategy, which everyone is working on the same page too. So we always encourage those who've got linkages to government, etc., to try and think more holistically rather than it going down to a very small local level. We don't always follow the evidence either, do we? We've seen that with COVID. It's a huge mess of manipulated data and models, which all models are wrong really, but some are, I guess, more useful than others. And again, we have conflicts in there which have to be resolved. But really, the big elephant in the room is the fact that we consume that amount of resources per year globally. 60 billion tons is an incredible amount, and we probably only have, let's say only, I think it was on a previous slide, maybe 4 or 5 billion tons of waste. So the rest of that is out there held in stock. So if we're diminishing natural resources, it's not being recovered because it's held in people's houses and in assets and property, etc. Then we can't keep continuing to draw new resources if they're not there. You can see some comparisons of EU countries compared to others around the world. So kind of, I guess, sitting in the middle there, if you've got the USA as an outlier. So the big challenge really for some, we'll say, is about the economic metabolism we have is enormous for devouring and consuming resources. Can we scale back on that? I think for a lot of businesses that will be the thing that isn't discussed. It's a challenge really to say, how can we we might have to do this with a lot less demand as well as to do it more efficiently. So hopefully that's a doom and gloom. Maybe it's not as bad as that. We talked about quality as well, which I think is an important one because it's a big factor in terms of, you mentioned that potential liability with reusing products. There's also legal issues, other legal issues with that in terms of unwasting a waste is quite difficult in the UK. So if you have a product that you want to make, a waste you want to make into a product, it's quite a expensive and litigious process to do that, and we need to improve our laws that allow us to do that. There's also technical issues as well. So this is Newton's first law, inertia, and with some of our materials, they have a residence time in use. The ideal circular economy is that there's 100% circularity with all products. But in reality, that isn't going to happen. There will be a residence time where quality issues come in, where we're not able to, with other materials are impregnating the product and it's actually not able to be reused again or recovered again. So that will always put a lifetime on resources. So for steel, it might be 500 years or less. For other products that are more vulnerable, it might be less than that. Entropy, for those who've got any thermodynamics background, I'm looking for any hands raised. There's lots of heads going down, so I'm guessing not. It's basically saying that things always get worse. Things don't improve. Things always go into more chaos and disorder. So again, it's another thing to say that to run counter to that is difficult. An egg that's broken doesn't reform by itself. So again, we've always got to build in a little bit of slack for issues that we can't control. We mentioned legal barriers to unwaste and waste, cost challenges, technical knowledge, business models that we currently operate to. And we mentioned a little bit about that in terms of servitization, leasing arrangements. And I'm hoping that these are kind of all a list of opportunities that that you see you can use to prioritize your resources and your efforts? Do we need to spend time in terms of building the case financially? Do we need to look at rebound effects? Do we need to look at unintended consequences? So we might make our products lighter, use a different material. That material might have a higher greenhouse gas impact. So we may have improved from a resource point of view, but had more emissions. So I think we're going to have some of those conflicts that again, we just have to be open and declare and transparent about what they are. I think there's also the risk that the term gets hijacked as well, and we've seen quite a lot of that. We saw that with sustainability over the years, that you just stick the word in front of what you're selling, and all of a sudden that's an example of it. Sustainable landfill, sustainable aviation, etc., etc. And I think, as we said, there's no such thing as being there at the defined point in time that something is circular or sustainable, but there is a process, there's an evolution, there's a scale to it. Again, we've had this on before. Really, I think it's just something to pick up on each of those stages and use it to prioritize what how you will tackle the issues in your business, what the materials you use, where do they come from, how does the model work, and there's no particular hierarchy with where you start. It's important to have the data that gives you a point to measure what you've done to improve, which can be one of the harder things to do. We've mentioned a lot. Andy's mentioned lots of examples. I saw recently IKEA are now taking back old furniture to resell. I suspect they'll have to repair quite a bit of it because some of it doesn't last too long. I know some stuff that I have, I wouldn't want to sell it to someone else. But yeah, again, that's just trying to apply some of the thinking. Nike are doing some of that with their trainers. They're taking back old trainers and they're using or recycling the materials into new products. So again, there might be a point where you just lease your trainers and give them back at the end, rather than, and I mean, you can almost do that at the minute because lots of finance models work that way. You can go and buy stuff on Amazon and not pay for it. And in effect, it's almost like a lease, except they don't have any responsibility to take the product back at the end. We're probably going to see that with the heat pumps that have been announced yesterday in the net zero plan. We've probably got how many homes in the country? 30 million. How many boilers are we going to replace? Who's going to take them back? I know that I got a leaflet from a well-known heat pump manufacturer this week, and it said, as an exclusion, we won't take away your old boiler. We'll give you a new heat pump, but we're not going to take away the old one. So where do they go? Same with mobile phones. 15 million mobile phones in circulation. 15 million. I mean, that's 2 each. Doesn't it? Just seems incredible. So again, building that into the model is critical. KPIs, I think, are indicators of improvement are important, and those could be things like the recycled content of your materials, the length of time. You mentioned with your polystyrene, you put a felt tip marker on it, and that tells you the length of time in the market, and that's really good. So again, you'll probably have some data to show what that is, but that's a good indicator of being more circular, not necessarily completely circular. You might have to go through a rhombus kind of hybrid and evolve over time and become a bit oblate, and then eventually it might be circular. We talked about the standards that are coming out. There's a BS 8001 which was developed a few years ago, and there's an ISO that's currently being worked on. So using the principles within that gives a good foundation, a good structure. There's a building blocks within the Ellen MacArthur Foundation which are useful as well, and they not all will be applicable, but use the ones that are. And sort of finally, these are some of the features and the key effects from what circularity might look like, how you might be able to measure it, how you might be able to sort of track the journey of you've gone through. Some of the impacts might be positive in one area and negative in another. That's it. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
So we're going to do a Q&A session, include some of the questions that have come in online, and then if anybody wants to ask any questions from the audience.
If we start off in the room first, because we've got a couple already. So if you've got any questions in the room, if you can actually state who you are, where you're from, and then your question for the benefit of those who are online.
Oh, I'm Ben Smith. I'm from the AMRC Northwest. And my question is, as we transition to a circular economy, we theoretically less first off parts manufacturing. How do you see the manufacturing industry, in particular SMEs and raw material providers, evolving?
Do you want to go with that?
Hi, Ben. I'm the head of procurement at Senator Group. And at the moment, we're looking at our supply chain and looking at how it's evolving. We don't fully understand that yet, but we are looking to map and segment that and see what that circular economy means for us. So the cycle will be going on will be mapping the supply chain and the impact, looking at the design requirements, and then looking to onboard our suppliers, and then eventually build that capability and seeing where we get to at the end of that. Okay.
I've got a question here for Sustain. What are the next plans for Sustain?
Next plans for Sustain. I suppose what we've done really well is recycle. When we first started doing that, that was kind of new, but it's kind of expected now. So the next step up that waste hierarchy will be to try and reuse some more of those materials and explore ways with our suppliers in partnership and collaboration, and look to try and get some of those raw materials, because they are not infinite, and look at ways that are practical, and getting raw materials back into potentially some of the products that we use.
Yeah, I think the remanufacture part of Sustain will massively take off over the next few years as well. I think the more interest that people get and the more requests that are coming in, that will bulk up that part of Sustain, which is only quite small in comparison at the minute, isn't it?
Okay, we've talked about supply chains, both from Sustain and from Senator, and we have touched on supply chains in other presentations. What's the best way of actually engaging with your supply chain? Bearing in mind that a lot of supply chains have a significant SME element to them. I'll throw that open to the full panel and everybody can join on that one.
Good question. I'm just thinking of a physical example. So we moved to additive manufacturing, 3D printing on industrial scale, and we brought in the filament, and it came in these massive, not massive, these it's almost like a film case, an aluminium case, and it was incredibly robust. And what was happening was they were bringing it in, we were using the filament and then recycling the aluminium, so we get the benefit. What we did is we went back to the supplier and said, look, these containers are bloody good. They are, you must spend a lot of money on these. And they said, yeah, we do. So, well, do you not want them back? I went, yeah, if you wouldn't mind. I said, well, if you just, next time you drop some off, will you pick them? If we put them in a box and put them in the recycling, do we pick them up from there and take them back? Yeah, that'll save us loads. Good idea. Right. So again, it's money, but then you've engaged them in a business bottom line saving. And then you've got to understand the circular economy. That's their reverse logistics. Yeah. So it's just a case of sparking it off, money talks, and then they start to talk about other things as well. And you can get them on the journey to circularity.
Attention, yeah. I mean, for me, I would start with the biggest, prioritize your supply chain. That could be in terms of cost, it could be in terms of CO2, it could be in terms of other variables, in terms of the technical difficulty with the resources you have, however you want to prioritize them. And it's the 80-20 rule. Start with the biggest supplier, the most important supplier from a risk point of view, and talk to them and find a win-win for both parties, because I'm sure most are willing to talk because they want to carry on working with you and supplying to you. So just start with the largest and work down and evolve and learn from that how best people engage with you.
Yeah, and one of the approaches Senator's looking to take as well is obviously to collaborate with the suppliers and do that through some JVs, some joint ventures, some workshops, looking at the capabilities, what we can share and pool from that resource. So once we've mapped and segmented those, that will be the next steps on how we'll take our approach. Okay.
Anyone else?
Right, I think we've exhausted that one. One from me. I've been host. I can actually chuck in a prerogative. Is circular economy, again speaking from an SME perspective, is circular economy a threat or an opportunity from an SME perspective?
It's always an opportunity, isn't it? And even more so now, as Chris said. I've had this question because I had a question from SMEs. We've been demystifying tour on net zero, and one of the questions that came back was, well, it doesn't apply to me. So it's a £5 million limit. I said, well, that tells me two things. First of all, one, as an organisation, you've got incredibly low aspirations, and two, do you not realise this is going to come down through the value chain? So all these contracts, NHS, for example, off the top of my head, they will ask for, and the government, I've seen HMRC recently saying that any contract over 5 million, you need to have a net zero pledge, you need to sign our pledge, you need to sign up for a plan, you need to have some demonstratable. Right, so, okay, that applies to me. What about my suppliers? How am I going to bring them in so I can contribute to the whole raw thing of showing how I've met the plan? It's going to go down through the value chain, and the more and more SMEs that pick their up, the more opportunities they're going to spot now, and they're going to get on the journey to net zero and take circularity with
I mean, I think that it's hugely variable. SME is sort of a term that's thrown out to mean one size of company, and it's 99.7% of the economy in the UK. So it's not homogenous term at all. And I think there's huge variety in terms of not just the size of companies, but also the sector that they're in. So it's going to be hugely variable. If you make stuff, then it'll probably happen sooner than if you're in the service sector. You might just find that if there's other avenues through improved resource efficiency in terms of how you use materials, and that you'll have to do, otherwise your costs will be so high that it'll be prohibitive. So I think some drivers will just force people to do things differently. You know, we saw a big driver with COVID and how businesses have adapted to that, and they probably carry on many of those learnings in terms of how they work. So some will be done too, and some will be pioneers and do it a bit sooner and probably benefit a bit more from it.
I also think that it will be only a threat as far as the SMEs are concerned. I think it's adaptability as well. If people are willing to adapt and start thinking outside of the box and go on the journey with like the bigger companies, then I think there's the opportunity.
There's no more questions online. So I'm now looking around the room. Oh, we've got a couple of questions. So new speaker, give the people online a rest from my voice.
Hi, my name's Adrian Ciccone from Eden Sustainable. A lot of the talk today has been obviously the circular economy, which is about cost saving and driving that through the supply chain. To get to net zero carbon emissions, the next step, which I know Leanne has been spearheading, is obviously generation, and we're partnering them in solar PV. Is that something that you'll roll out to the supply chain to encourage them to start the generation of their own power and electricity as a partner in cost savings and recycling?
I think ultimately setting a science-based target of our own, we've got to start looking at our scope 3 target And we would like to see some of our supply chain setting science-based targets of their own. Obviously, that's the way that the Science-Based Target Initiative will work. And I think to get to net zero, there's no way that's going to happen without renewables. So I think, you know, we will be pushed down that route at some point.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Renewables is definitely a major part of the mix. To me, it's a jigsaw puzzle, and that circular economy is a major part of that jigsaw puzzle. It's all contributors for net zero. But yeah, renewables is a major part of that. The thing for me is circularity of renewables assets at the moment. That's something that's been worked on. So we're making all these solar panels. What are they going to become next?
Well, we're not even at that journey yet in terms of what we're asking our suppliers to do. Ultimately, you know, we've got to set our own targets and then understand our supply chain's capability fully, where that fits in with our strategy and our production initiatives, and then, you know, we'll drum down to that detail on what we're asking our suppliers or what suppliers we're dealing with ultimately.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully it'll happen naturally. We're seeing with increase in fuel costs, electricity costs, that the renewable argument is more moot as time goes on. If you can generate it yourself, then that gives you quite a big buffer in terms of cost increases that are happening right now. Also, there's obviously other benefits in terms of security of supply. We're seeing more issues with that in some sites, and being able to sell the excess as well, or store it in batteries. You know, there's panels are more efficient than what they were before by a long way. And even in the Northwest, you know, we can, it's pretty accurate actually, the year-on-year returns you get, the yield you get from a PV system doesn't really change that much, but the panels are evolving to be able to work in lower sunlight conditions and in heavy rain as well. I see there's a new panel coming out that takes advantage of it's called the triboelectric effect, and it picks up energy from the gravitational energy from the rain as it flows down the panel. I know it's quite small, it's tiny, but it's just adding another kind of increment to this. So all of a sudden, we needed incentives in the past with the feed-in tariff, but there's other drivers now that will mean it will happen. So I can't see many supply chains forcing their customers to have renewables, but hopefully it will just happen by itself.
Just to bring it back to more circular stuff, an associate of mine I'm working with, his company is taking the batteries from the spent batteries from the buses of Milton Keynes and he makes PV systems and he's aligning them to make sustainable housing. What they're doing is almost creating a giant battery within a housing estate in terms of energy storage. As I said before, it's all part of the mix, which is a good thing. Don't get me wrong, it's brilliant. But again, to consider where you are in the journey, as Gino said, if you're not the message you should take is almost resource efficiency before you do that, because the PV systems can mask the resource efficiency potential savings that you make in an organization. So PV is a brilliant investment to make, but it's part of a journey where you should consider where you can make quick wins and better savings first, resource efficiency first, and then make your organizations as robust as possible by building renewables in and battery storage as well, is what I'd say.
Thanks, Steve. My name's Bill Nodwell. I'm on the project management team at a furniture manufacturers in the area, not Senator, it's a SME. But we are part of Senator's supply chain. And what you're talking about now, the nitty-gritty of what you're talking about, is the real reason why we came here today, to see if this was going to be a jargon session or actually people talking about actually getting things done. You talk about a circular economy. We've been doing this for 6 years, not because we are innovators or because we are looking to get any credit from the Green Footprint Brigade. We're doing it to survive. we need to recycle stuff to survive. We need to manage the waste and try and get something back from it to survive. Biomass, solar panels, even LED lighting. All of these things are part of surviving. This is how we see it. But as a project manager, trying to convince the directors of an SME to go down that road is difficult. It's a bigger challenge sometimes than the project itself, because the focus for them is production, is trying to make a profit. And we all know how difficult that's becoming. And when we start talking to them about the initiatives, commendable though they might be, the first question they say to us, what's going to cost? What do we get out of it? Can we afford to divert resources and money to it without any guaranteed payback? And it's difficult. But what I'm doing now is I'm taking a message back to the directors from this today, because everything I've heard is encouraging for us, for our journey to survive. And I picked up on a couple of things. One Leanne said about SMEs, suppliers, going on the journey with the bigger companies. That's exactly what I was hoping that we would hear, because that's exactly what we want to do. Because it might be survival today, but tomorrow we might actually be doing some good. Thanks, Steve.
As the panel got, that was more of a comment and a statement.
That's very encouraging.
So if we're to break it down, what are the first few steps that you'd recommend for an enterprise that are looking to change their business model to a circular economy model instead?
Andy or Chris, I think you're better.
It very much depends what they do and what supply chain they're in, what sector they're in, etc. But for me, I would be looking to understand with data, what my materials, resources are, where they come from, how much they are, and start there. And that is saying that is quite easy, collection of data, but for many it's the hardest bit because we just don't have it. Accurate data, a reliable way of gathering it over a longer period of time, and it gets very murky and messy when you go into supply chain impacts as well. But to start simply, start with what you have and try and understand, to use the term materiality with these things, which is what are the biggest risk areas, either impacts in terms of climate or impacts in terms of cost or compliance, and focus on those. And if there's 5% left at the end, it's very, very hard to get, and it's only for 5%. Is it worth putting your resources into that? Andy will tell you the rest of the answer.
Andy will tell you three things. Data, as Chris said, is key. When I first, because I come from a production background, and I sort of put my hand up and said, I'll do the environmental bit about 20 years ago, and started to capture the data. And the second largest, through the data capture, the second largest waste stream that we had as an organization was wooden pallets, which I thought was really strange because we don't make wooden pallets. And so it was like, wow, did anybody ever realize that? Right, we need to focus on that. That's our biggest waste stream. So data is key. The next thing is, as I spoke money, I chaired a business environmental network for 16 years or so. The point being is that we had even a large automotive component manufacturer came to me. Two engineers came to us and said, look, I won't mention the names, but our board doesn't do green. They're not interested. I said, well, okay, don't talk green then. I said, what's the problem? He said, well, we've got this oil waste storage problem. Right, okay, we'll help you work on that. We did. Right, it saved them £17,000 a year. Right, take that back to the board, tell them what you've saved, right, and could you use that money to invest in something else? Then they looked at VSDs, variable speed drives and all the production lines, yeah? £80,000 saving in NG line. Now the board's green. They don't even talk about being green, but they are. They don't need to know about it. Where would I start? In my where I started is from a manufacturing background, is in the manufacturing area. There's two areas: the offices, all the admin, We had a lot of those. And then there's a manufacturing area, and I'd use this in my case studies, which area was simpler? The manufacturing area, because you're taking away all the variables and the control, right? If you're running a 9,000 system, you've got workstation process books, you've got workstation process, you've got a workstation, you work out the ergonomics of it from it, stuff comes in. When you throw that away, you say, stop, right, we need to have a container for that, right? And you do it along the line. We took everybody's bins away in the offices and there was tears. It's like, you can't do that. It's well, we've done it in the production areas. Why have you got a problem? He says, my bin. This is my, no, right? Take away the bins, you have a central segregation area. You get some random elements who put the wrong stuff in the wrong bin deliberately, but they're not realizing that usually it's got their name on it. So you could go back, it would be Inspector Clouseau, there you go, right, and hand it back. There's all these little things you can do, but I start off the manufacturing area because one, you've got more people engaged in Kaizen, typically in that sort of area, they get it more often, they understand the benefits of it, they understand the bottom line, this sort of thing contributes to their job security. On top of that, you can build it into the control systems. Just a little tip.
I do also think that design and procurement are key stages in the circular economy, because at the very first instance, like Sustain does so much good stuff, but that's at the end of its life. So the design and the procurement of the products and the materials going into the products, if that was done thinking of a circular economy, then it would cut out a lot of the waste at the end of its life anyway. So that's personally two key areas that I think.
I've got a couple of questions online. First one from Paul Barker from Nelson Cone College Group. How do you think colleges can help in the development of knowledge, critical thinking and collaboration skills required to make the differences within organisations to encourage circular thinking?
I think with quite a few colleges, they're coming to Senator at the moment to see what kind of skills we'd be looking for going forward as far as a net zero and obviously the circular economy is concerned. So I think collaboration is definitely key in that, and looking at the different opportunities as far as training and skills is required. Yeah, anybody else?
Leanne says, I've always been a big component of this is collaboration. Sustainability is a journey that's pointless taking by yourself. It's one of my old strap lines. It's all about sharing, transparent sharing of best practice, because an understanding that sustainability is not really a competitive issue unless we're all unless we're all sharing the best practice. The more sustainable we can all be, the better. Colleges can get involved with that. I'd say teach the business skills, teach the opportunities, teach how to convey those in the boardroom, those aspects, getting that across. I've mentored a few students now that come out of university, and the biggest aspects are like, yeah, we should be doing this. No, yes, we should be doing this. How are you communicating that without being in somebody's face and understanding the business benefits of that? Yeah, teach people to get that across, and then you can get non-believers. It doesn't matter what they believe. If you can get that message across, then you get more circularity built in. Design, the ladies I talked to on the brilliant Suzanne and Sophie that I talked to, bang on about design and building it at the beginning, because they know that my learning point was if you build it in at the beginning, you take away most of the problems anyway, and it just builds circularity. And so the key thing is to get designers on board.
Yeah, I think colleges, universities have all got, I mean, they're the employees of the future, aren't they? The future leaders, etc. So I know there are some further education, higher education, circular economy training packages coming through, degrees, etc. And, you know, the more, I suppose we recognise the importance of them through apprenticeships, etc. Then that gives us the, you know, the future leaders to drive it and make it happen. And I think, you know, as gentleman said over there, you know, you've got to make the case around it. And I think it used to be in the past, you know, certainly there's still some of this, but going back 10 years, it was always, how much is this going to cost? And I think now there is a much bigger proportion of people that are saying, well, what's the cheapest way of getting there? And that's a different flip in the mindset, saying, well, we have to do it. So what's the best way of getting there? And some can obviously go further than others, but getting to the end goal is important. So colleges, unis, schools, these are things that this has to be in the curriculum, so that those people coming through, it's second nature rather than it's something that's done to them whenever they're in a meeting with their manager being asked to be more circular.
Okay, I have another question. Okay.
I'm also looking at the data, so there's a lot of information on circular economy and the concepts and the kind of principles that you would look at. But actually, when you start to have a look at the nitty-gritty and the data on how you get to quantify, and that is a question that we get asked on a regular basis. We come up with these ideas and we're asked to quantify it, but that's actually a lot harder than you would expect. So I think looking at the data and the numbers that support the principles.
You'll be pleased there's only one more question online. And I'm going to apologise to Lina, because I know I would fall over her surname, so I'm not going to attempt it. Lina is from Hampshire County Council. Can local government do anything to support businesses' journey to a circular economy?
Yes. No, seriously, Telford, I come from Telford, and they have a Telford Climate Action Plan. They're posting it at the moment. I'm vice chair of the Telford Business Board and the Sustainability Champion. So it's working with those. They understand that they've got, as a local authority, their own footprint to cope with. What they're beginning to realise, I hope they're watching this, is that there's a lot of expertise out in the business world, right? Because we've been looking at this for years, as we've been saying, they're all working towards net zero now. It's about understanding that we can work together in partnership. And we're getting things like the social aspects from it as well. The thing that I'm learning from it is not just, the hard business stuff of let's save money. There's the social aspects you can build in. There's the job growth, the job employability, the business continuity aspects. These can all work together and they can understand how to do that. But sometimes you need some support, and they might run some support business sectors. I was going to ask people about that around here, actually. There is the Marches LEP that we have and the growth hubs. And we've worked with Leicester's Growth Hub as well, doing webinars for them. It's about communicating that best practice and the business support that's available. Local authorities should be part of that, because they need to understand that building the circular economy and net zero infrastructure in their own area makes it almost like an inward investment opportunity for them, right? Attracting more business to them, right? It just becomes self-sufficient.
I have no more questions online. However, one, I'll follow up on that one. But two, before we start on my answer to business support, we've talked about manufacturing. We talked about supply chain. We actually started to talk a little bit about design. What about the customer? Does the customer want the circular economy? Is that a driver? Who's pushing that? I'll let anybody answer that one.
Got to be a demand there, hasn't it? What's the point in making something circular or green if there's no demand and nobody wants it? It's just be a waste. So yeah, I think we've all got a part to play. Collaboration with supply chain, manufacturers, but also there's got to be an appetite as well from the customers. And if there isn't the demand there, then it's probably not the avenue we want to be going down for that product or that item, whatever it is.
I think at the moment as well, there's a lot of talk about sustainability and the need to be more green, and we want circular products. However, because it's not second nature to us at the minute, then when we are coming to the point where, like when you talked about remanufacturing and the work that had to go into remanufacturing, it's all new, it's all learning, and it's probably going to cost more initially than what a linear model would cost. So that cost has got to be passed on to the customer, and if they're willing to pay for that, if they really want the green or the circular product, then all well and good. But if they're not willing to pay for that, then there's going to be a sticking point for now.
I think there's a lot of confusion as well around the language that's used. There's a lot of marketing language that's very misleading. So I touched on it when I was presenting. And, you know, because something's recyclable, it doesn't mean it's going to get recycled. If something's got recycled content in it, that's very different to recyclable. When something's actually recycled, it means it's recycled. So I think there's a lot of greenwashing out there. There's a lot of marketing language that people are jumping on. And it's difficult. It's difficult for people who aren't in the industry to understand. And I think just the communication around it could be clearer. And it's just cutting through the stuff that's kind of a bit misleading, really.
I think in many respects we can. The customer obviously will drive things, but I think we also create customer demand. You know, we tell customers what they need to have. We create products and services and push them their way, and they buy them. We do it all the time. Big companies do it in terms of the data they have on customers. You know, Tesco tell us when we should have a barbecue. You know, the stuff is out there when it gets to 18 degrees and it's 25. It's too hot for ice cream, so they bring something else out. So in a way, you know, it depends. We might think we're choosing things, but I think we get told what to have in many cases, regardless. So I think making it easy for people to do the circular economy, sustainable thing. You know, I mentioned about the right to repair. That's complicated. You know, who's read the regulations in the room? Anyone? The eco design, yes. You know, a few kind of. I started looking at a few of the schedules, and you know, there's a lot of detail in there. And you know, people aren't going to do it, so we can end up making those regulations could make it worse for people, more expensive to repair, so they don't do it. So we have to make it easy, and we have to sort of go in there with a wholesome approach of trying to make products repairable from a design point of view. They don't apply to mobile phones, which is crazy. You know, display devices are on the list, but excluding mobile phones. You know, why is that? So I think we have to make it easy. A lot of countries will have to go through the consumerism bubble. We're still going through it. It's very difficult to then say to other developing countries, you can't do the same. And you know, we've dematerialized, but we've probably used more material than ever. So it's so I think we have to kind of, you know, local government and national government have to lead by example, really, and tell consumers the right thing to do and build trust so that people believe them, and you know, sell the quality side as well, as was mentioned. It's not inferior, and we have the right guarantees and standards in place, etc.
Love throwing that banana skin right in at the end. To go back to what support is available locally and in Lancashire, there's the Chamber Low Carbon Programme that actually helps businesses to reduce their carbon footprint, but also help people who are developing low carbon technologies, how to help them to develop it and bring it to market. So that is supported by Europe, but also by Lancashire County Council through Boost. So it is regional, and the universities also have a number of programs to work with businesses. And like I said, that support is mainly free and can be found on the Boost website if you're based in Lancashire. Just before I get all the international calls coming in to Boost, they won't thank me for that. We've got no more questions from the internet. There's no more questions in the room, and I'm conscious of time. So I'd like to wrap up today's session by thanking all our speakers, panelists and presenters, and Senator for hosting us today. And if we could show our appreciation to their time and expertise.